Hey, this is MJ, the coding coach, and I am back. Come with me as I code a scenario, and I can show you how to select the proper codes for the medical diagnosis that are presented. Okay, so you're going to read this with me, the scenario, and we're going to find the codes. Patient presents with shortness of breath and edema. Past medical history is significant for hypertension, diabetes with PVD, which is peripheral vascular disease, and cardiomegaly with heart failure. Upon receiving the results of the GFR test, the patient is diagnosed with chronic kidney disease stage 3 in 2022 and is currently on renal dialysis. The provider determines the edema and shortness of breath is due to the chronic heart failure or the congestive heart failure. It's very important to know your abbreviations and your medical terms. As you saw in that scenario, HTN is going to stand for hypertension. We know that DM is going to stand for diabetes. PVD is going to stand for peripheral vascular disease. And CHF is going to stand for congestive heart failure. Okay, let's take a look at the scenario again. Right here, you can see the scenario. Patient presents with shortness of breath and edema. Past medical history is significant for hypertension, diabetes, PVD, and cardiomegaly with heart failure. Upon receiving the results of the GFR test, and we know there has to be some kind of kidney test using context clues, the patient is diagnosed with chronic kidney disease stage 3 in 2022 and is currently on renal dialysis. The provider determines the edema and shortness of breath is due to CHF. So now let's go through the list of the diagnoses that we have. So I am showing you how to go through the scenario in code. Everything that we have here, that does not mean we're going to code for it and use it. I am just breaking down the scenario so you'll see how to medical code. So they mentioned shortness of breath, the first diagnosis that we have in the medical record over here, our fake medical record. We have edema. We have hypertension. We have diabetes. We have PVD. We have cardiomegaly. We have chronic kidney disease stage 3. We have dialysis, and we have heart failure. Okay, so we know that the edema and the shortness of breath is due to the CHF. The edema and the shortness of breath is due to the CHF. And per coding guidelines, if we have a definitive diagnosis, then we are not going to code for signs and symptoms. Again, if you have a definitive diagnosis, then we're not going to code for signs and symptoms. Let me give you an example. If a patient goes to the doctor's office because they're coughing, they're sneezing, they have chills, fever, things like that. When they get to the doctor's office and the doctor say, hey, you're having all of these symptoms because you have the flu. Well, we know that the patient has the flu. That's the diagnosis. So we know the diagnosis, then we don't have to code the signs and the symptoms that's because of the diagnosis. Now, there was coughing, sneezing, chills, fever, all of that, and the doctor said, hey, we ran a flu test, it's not the flu. Hey, we ran a COVID test, it's not COVID. Well, we don't know what the diagnosis is, so then we will code for the cough, the fever, the chills, the runny nose, or whatever they're having. But when there is a definitive diagnosis, we're not going to code the signs and symptoms that are related to this diagnosis. So we know from this scenario, we're not going to code the edema, and we're not going to code the shortness of breath. Here's the list of diagnoses that I pulled out from the medical record. So we can scratch off shortness of breath. We can scratch off edema because we know we're not going to code those because the edema and the shortness of breath is due to the heart failure. So now let me write out the codes for you. Hypertension would be I-10. Diabetes with no complications would be E11.9. Peripheral vascular disease is I73.9. Cardiomegaly think cardiomegaly is I-51 something. Chronic kidney disease stage 3 is going to be N18.30. Dialysis, we know if a person is on dialysis, we're going to always use the code Z99.2 for dependence on renal dialysis. And heart failure unspecified, we know this is I-50.9. So look at the diagnosis. The thing about risk adjustment coding or coding period, there are combination codes. Combination codes that we're going to use. A combination code is one code that reflects two or more diagnoses. It's kind of like putting the codes together to mean what it is without using a lot of codes. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first we're going to have hypertension, heart disease, because cardiomegaly is heart disease. And you've never heard of cardiomegaly, then if you know your medical terms, it's easy to figure out what it is. Cardio means heart, mega means large, so enlarged heart. So however, there is you see there are different separate codes each condition. And again, that diabetes code, that's diabetes without any complications. And we know from reading the medical record that there is complications with the diabetes. They have diabetes and PVD, and they also have chronic kidney disease. Diabetes affects your peripheral vascular or your vascular system, and diabetes also affects your kidneys. So for hypertension, heart disease, CKD, heart failure, there's a combination code that we can use. Okay, so let me let you know that coding is all about coding to the highest level of specificity. For an example, if I read a medical chart and the doctor says that the patient broke their leg, okay, was it their right leg, their left leg? Was it their upper leg near the thigh or their lower leg near the ankle? So coding is about being as specific as possible. So again, there is a combination code for hypertension, heart disease, CKD, and heart failure. And that code is going to be I-13.2. And I-13.2 is hypertensive, heart, and chronic kidney disease with heart failure stage 5, CKD, or ESRD. And we know that ESRD stands for end-stage renal disease. There are only 6 stages to chronic kidney disease. So instead of saying stage 6, then the provider will typically write ESRD. And we know that if you have ESRD, then you are on dialysis. No matter what stage that the provider wrote in the note, if they're on dialysis, then they have ESRD, the end stage. Okay, so you won't have to take my word from it. You see it in the book. I-13.2, hypertensive heart and chronic kidney disease with heart failure and with stage 5 chronic kidney disease or end-stage renal disease. Also, look at that red note. See, your coding book tells you exactly what to do. It says use an additional code to identify the type of heart failure, and it tells you the exact code category it's supposed to come out of, I-50 dot whatever. Also, use an additional code to identify the stage of chronic kidney disease. It's either going to be N18.5, N18.6. So from this list, we have hypertension, we have the heart disease, we have the chronic kidney disease, and the heart failure, all 4 of those, one code. One code for all 4 of those conditions. So remember, it asks us to add a code for the stage of CKD and the type of heart failure. Well, it only just says CHF. So we know that there's heart failure unspecified. So we're going to add a I-50.9 for the CHF unspecified and the N18.6 for ESRD. We know they have end stage because they are on dialysis.